Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 39th day of the 107th Legislature second session. Our chaplain today is Pastor Jeff Slike from Christ Lincoln in Yankee Hill in Senator Geist District. Please rise.
We bow our heads in prayer. Heavenly Father, we're grateful today for the gift of another day. First and foremost on our minds today are the people of the Ukraine, refugees by hundreds of thousands, pouring over borders to neighboring countries. It's hard for us to fathom the pain, the heartache, the devastation that they experience. We pray for peace in that region of the world. We pray for cooler heads to prevail. We pray that you would, in mighty and powerful ways, restrain evil and promote good. We pray today for President Putin and for the leaders of Russia. We pray for a change of heart and mind so that rather than pursuing war, they would miraculously pursue peace. We pray for President Zelensky and the other leaders of the Ukraine that you would guard and defend them from every evil, that you would grant them continued courage and strength as they lead, that they too would pursue peace. As our thoughts turn to our nation, we pray for President Biden. We lift up the members of the Congress and Senate, the justices of the Supreme Court. And not only for our national leaders, but as we are a nation of states, we pray for Governor Ricketts, for his leadership team. We ask for wisdom among us who serve today in the legislature as well. You raise up leaders. We pray today that we be mindful that ultimately we serve you, that we answer to you for the way we carry out the leadership trust you have given to us. Make us humble. Make us wise. Enable the people of our state and beyond to be blessed by the decisions we make today. Heavenly Father, as we close, we ask one thing. What do you want from us today? How can we serve you today? We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Slike. I recognize Senator Clements for the pledge.
Please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the country which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 39th day of the 107th Legislature second session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There is a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Items?
Mr. President, new A Bill 902A offered by Senator Aguilar is a bill for an act relating to appropriations to carry out the provisions of Legislative Bill 902. In addition to that, an announcement that the Executive Board will meet in executive session at 9:30 this morning under the north balcony. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Slama would like to recognize our Doctor of the Day, Brett Copley of Syracuse, who is serving as the Family Physician of the Day on behalf of the Nebraska Academy of Family Physicians. Dr. Copley, if you would please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, we'll proceed to general file.
Mr. President, first bill this morning, Legislative Bill 773, offered by Senator Brewer. It's a bill for an act relating to firearms to prohibit regulation of the carrying of concealed handguns by cities, villages, and counties, provide for the carrying of a concealed handgun without a permit, provide for requirements, limits, and offenses related to carrying a concealed handgun, change provisions of the Concealed Handgun Permit Act, provide penalties, eliminate definitions, to harmonize provisions, repeal original sections. Bill was introduced on January 5th of this year. It was placed on general file pursuant to a motion filed by Senator Brewer on Tuesday of this week.
Senator Brewer, you're recognized to open on LB 773.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. And good morning, Nebraska, especially those listening in this morning. I think for us to fully understand 773, we need to go back and talk a little about how we got here. This has been a 6-year process. I made a promise to folks when I first got elected that I would make this a priority bill, and I have done that over and over. I will continue that work. So if we have to next year have another committee hearing, have another poll motion, have another trip to the floor, understand I will keep my promise. Now, so everybody understands, when we had the committee hearing, I purposely asked to have everyone stand down, to only bring in a handful of folks, so that hearing did not run for hours and hours like the red flag hearing did. I did that as a courtesy so that opportunity to look at 773 would be done in a way so that the committee had a fair balance on both sides, and it would get a hearing and we get a chance to bring it to the floor. That did not happen. So we went through the poll motion. That is how we got to where we're at here now. Sadly, this bill is simply what I would call a coat motion. Because what we're talking about currently in the state of Nebraska, it is legal to open carry. Not an issue. But what we're saying is, if you put on your coat and you cover that firearm, now you're a criminal. If you want to do anything other than that, then you're going to have to pay for it. So we're going to discuss whether this is constitutionally sound and a good idea. We need to look at the difference between a privilege and a right. If I was to ask any of the women in this body if they voted, I am pretty sure they'd all say yes, as they should. But if I ask them if they had to pay a fee, a toll to vote, I would hope none of them had to. We have the 19th Amendment. August 6, 1920, guaranteed women the right to vote. And we're asked the lawyers in this body a question, do your clients have to get a Sixth Amendment permit before you can be hired to represent them? We don't do that. But for some reason, we've taken it upon ourselves to say if you want to carry a weapon, that you have been given the right in the Bill of Rights, and as I read in the poll motion in the first paragraph of the Nebraska Constitution, you're not able to do that. Now, there'll be some that get on the mic today, and today will be revealing. For those that are watching, take out a piece of paper and write on that paper pro, con, and neutral. And as everyone gets up to speak today, find a place to put that mark. And by the end of the day, I think you'll start to understand who here supports the Second Amendment and who doesn't. Now, there'll be issues brought up. I'm here and I'm ready to answer those questions. There may be somebody on this floor better qualified to address this issue, but there are not very many. Right now, there are 4 states who have passed this session constitutional carry, and it is sitting on the governor's desk. Alabama, Ohio, Indiana, Georgia. So if we pass it, we will be number 26. Remember that the United States Supreme Court has twice affirmed this bill about the individual constitutional protected right. This is not a law about everyone. The bottom line is this is for law-abiding citizens, so they don't have to jump through hoops for what is right. We here in this body need to answer a question today. Should Nebraska continue to be in the business of dispensing a privilege to people, something that is already a right? I think anyone who has ever carried concealed understands the responsibility that comes with carrying that weapon. Unlike anyone else in this body, I have had to take lives with a handgun. Now, that burden and that ghost will be with you the rest of your life. So I don't take this easy, what I'm asking here. I understand the responsibility, but there's a point we have to have a responsibility to the Constitution and to the people of Nebraska. I have spent many hours going back and forth on how to handle things here today. I struggle with some inadequacies. A fierce temper is one of those. I am sure that there has been plotting and planning to see how to derail this bill, and they may be successful. But the need is there. The emails, phone calls, orange cards that you get, they're going to keep coming. So if those who are plotting to kill this bill and stop the ability for folks to enjoy their Second Amendment right, understand, we will come back, we'll do it again. But we're going to continue to do it. We're going to continue to give folks a voice, and you're going to continue to get those emails. There is no other issue that we have before us that will bring the response. You all seen what happened when we tried to have a red flag law. We filled every briefing room that was available, hallways. Now again, as a courtesy, I have asked them to stand down. Do not bring guns to the Capitol. Be here to listen if you come, if you can't listen on television. But understand who supports the Second Amendment and who doesn't. Because I think there is a groundswell from the people of Nebraska on a lot of things. The teaching of our children, taxation, but their ability to enjoy their given right with the Second Amendment will rank with any of them. So today, as we go through and we talk about LB 773, we'll have plenty of time to discuss the strengths and weaknesses. We have an amendment. Many of you have got messages on that amendment.
1 minute.
But we will break that amendment down so you better understand it. But this amendment was done to support law enforcement. I would not bring a bill forward that would not have their support and would work against them. And so we spent many hours working a solution. So I would ask that you listen, and we will have more to say on 773. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, Senator Brewer would move to amend with AM 1757.
Senator Brewer, you're recognized to open on AM 1757.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I could take a lot of time here to talk about everything under the sun, but this bill is very basic. We're not playing a Ouija game here. You can read the bill in a matter of minutes. The amendments were necessary, and I'll tell you why. This white copy amendment only does two things. It changes and clarifies that we are only authorizing individuals to carry a concealed firearm that are at least the age of 21. In addition to that, it harmonizes the prohibited person definition that's used by both the state and the federal law. I believe these changes are necessary to avoid public confusion when it comes to the issue of carrying concealed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Debate is now open on AM 1757 and LB 773. Senator Morfeld, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to LB 773 and the underlying amendment. And I do this from the perspective of a gun owner who is also a licensed concealed carry owner and somebody who has been through the training. I also do it from the perspective of somebody who specializes in constitutional law. So we will talk today about the difference between what a privilege and a right is. We will talk today about how what this bill does with the amendment is actually more dangerous to gun owners' rights. Because what the amendment is doing is creating over a dozen enhancements, over a dozen criminal enhancements on gun owners if they commit a crime while carrying their firearm. Everything from not identifying yourself to another law enforcement officer as a concealed carry owner to a bunch of other crimes. So what we are doing, colleagues, is we are getting rid of the training requirement, which I think, quite frankly, was the most important part of the licensing process in being a concealed carry owner. We are getting rid of the training requirement, which is fairly extensive and important. And then we are enhancing a bunch of criminal penalties on concealed carry owners, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here, on concealed carry owners and not telling them about it. Colleagues, I wasn't in support of this bill when it was introduced, first as it's introduced, but now that we have an amendment, which is called a compromise amendment, which doesn't actually get law enforcement in support, it just gets one agency neutral. Now that we have this amendment, we're actually increasing criminal penalties for otherwise law-abiding gun owners. I'm afraid that they're going to get caught up in some of this stuff. And not only are they going to get caught up in it, we've also eliminated the training requirement to apprise people of what their rights are and what their responsibilities are as gun owners if they are concealed carrying. And when we talk about privileges and rights, the first thing that they teach you in constitutional law in law school is that rights are not unlimited. Even constitutional rights. Rights are not unlimited, and that includes constitutional rights. And the Supreme Court has found time and time again that reasonable regulations of guns are constitutional. Now, is it totally constitutional for us to pass this law? Absolutely. I will not deny that for a moment. It is our purview to be able to create laws to either regulate or not regulate firearms, as long as they're reasonable and they follow the constitutional framework that's been provided by the Supreme Court. But make no mistake, rights are not absolute. They never have been. There can be reasonable regulations, particularly when there is a compelling state interest. And when it is a constitutional right, there must be a compelling state interest. And the court has found time and time again that when it comes to reasonable regulations with firearms, there is a compelling state interest because there is a gun violence problem in our country. So I want to talk about the Constitution. I'm a big fan of the Constitution as somebody who specializes in constitutional law. But let's make sure that we frame our discussion and our debate surrounding the Constitution based in the actual precedents and based on the reality of constitutional rights. And the reality of constitutional rights is they are not simply just unlimited. And colleagues, there is a difference between open carry and concealed carry. The difference between open carry and concealed carry is this. When someone is open carrying, you have notice that they have a firearm. When someone is concealed carrying, you do not have notice. And so therefore, there is a heightened responsibility of that individual to have more knowledge as to the laws and to have more responsibilities surrounding concealed carry. And I'll tell you, as somebody who took the concealed carry course, it was very useful in brushing up on what are the responsibilities of someone who is concealed carrying. We are not repealing any of those laws, so those are still in place. And then also, what are your responsibilities if you are in a situation potentially involving deadly force? So colleagues, we are going to get rid of that training requirement. We are then going to enhance over a dozen different laws relating to people concealed carrying, and most people aren't even going to know about it. This is not only a dangerous bill for the public, and the law enforcement has come in and strongly opposed this.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morfeld. Mr. Clerk, you have an amendment to the amendment.
Mr. President, Senator John Kavanaugh would move to amend AM 1757 with 1794.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. So AM 1794 is an amendment that basically contemplates a bill I introduced in Judiciary this year that Senator Brewer co-sponsored, if I recall. I'm not obviously at this point not holding him to that co-sponsorship, but I do appreciate his recognition of the value of the idea. And so what AM 1794 does is essentially, it's the same bill as LB 1051. And it's about the principle that if the legislature is to decide that something that is no longer criminal, so if we decriminalize conduct, that we should make sure that those people who were previously convicted of that crime have a means by which to have that conviction removed from the record. I intend this as a serious amendment, which is why I filed it early and a month ago, and after Senator Brewer filed his amendment. It's my view that LB 773 passes. Some version of that has to include a means by which to have this expungement. I think that, at least in principle, Senator Brewer agrees with this, as he signed on to be a co-sponsor. AM 1794 provides for set-aside and expungement of records for concealed weapons offenses. Specifically, it provides for rebuttable presumption that if the legislature repeals 28-1202 or amends it in such a way that the moving party's conduct would no longer have been criminal under the new statute, the conviction could be set aside. So in essence, if LB 773 passes with AM 1794 attached, a person previously convicted of a concealed weapons offense for something that would would not be a crime after LB 773 has been made law, that the person would be able to have that conviction set aside and their record expunged. If you support LB 773, you should support AM 1794 as a statement of principle that if you decide that as a body that something should not be a crime, we should allow those previously convicted to have a chance to remedy that conviction. If you do not support LB 773, you should support AM 1794 as a chance to make the bill a little bit better. I expect we're going to have a long debate today, and I'd be happy to talk about my amendment and any questions. And basically, that's my prepared remarks, but basically what this is saying, LB 773, as Senator Brewer, I think eloquently put it in his opening, is a statement of principle. And it's a principle that he believes, and I think a number of people here believe in, that certain conduct should not be subjected to criminal sanction. And what I'm saying is that if you agree with that principle, if you agree with that one of the things that we should be doing is making sure that we are not unduly punishing the people going forward who were subjected to that law in the past. And I think this extends to many other aspects of our criminal justice system and our laws as well, is that when we recognize, if we think that something is no longer criminal conduct, that then people should be welcomed back into the fold, as it were. And this is again, I'm not stating that at this point that I agree and I with the underlying bill or the amendment I think that we're going to get to that Senator Brewer talked about that he's worked on, which I think is AM 2106. And Senator Moorfeld just went through a number of the issues with AM 2106 as well. And I have a similar number of problems with that, and I will talk about those again later. But fundamentally, what AM 1794, my amendment does, is it holds us accountable to be consistent to our stated principles, which is that people shouldn't be treated as criminals when they have previously engaged in conduct that we have decided is no longer criminal. And as I said, Senator Brewer, I think, agrees in principle on this. I know when it comes to a lot of these kind of conversations, there are a lot of competing parties, as he's got an AM 1757 here. He has AM 2106, which are his attempts, I think, at making changes to this bill to alleviate certain groups' concerns about the bill. But one of the guiding principles of the criminal justice system and of our laws needs to be recognizing when we've previously overly punished people, I guess. And so just to revisit, I guess, to clarify some of the things I said here. So what it would do, well, two things. One, it would say that if we repeal a section of the law, that person is not automatically does not automatically have those charges set aside and expunged. What it does is it creates a mechanism for rebuttable presumption. So it says they can go into a courtroom and they can say, this is the conduct I was convicted of is no longer a crime. And therefore, that means that the court should set this aside. The court still has the discretion not to set that aside. And the court has the discretion to look at the other factors that are considered under the current expungement statute and the current set aside, which is including the length of time since the offense, finishing your time, your punishment, and other conduct after the fact. And this amendment also has some language that clarifies how the expungement statute works in general principle, meaning that there are individuals, we currently have an expungement statute that allows for set-asides under all of these other circumstances that this legislature actually, I think, it put some more teeth into a year or two ago. But we're having a problem where it's not actually having an effect, meaning that if people are getting a set-aside and expungement and it's not actually sealing the record. So we put up some cleanup language in there as well that is actually, it was not in the original bill, it came up at the committee hearing for LB 1051. And so we are making sure that if we do pass this bill, if somebody does go into court, the person does successfully assert their right to have their record cleared going forward, that then they get it sealed. And so then that actually has the effect that we're intending. And so all around, what AM 1794 is saying, if we're going to undertake any kind of action like this, that we have to consider all of the attendant circumstances, all of the things that go along with changing the criminal code as well. There are a lot of other things to consider, and we'll talk about them today and probably tomorrow would be my guess. But one of the fundamental things to think about is how we treat people who have been affected, who have been covered under the current state of the law, and how their relationship to the law changes if we change this. And we need to make sure we consider those things as we go forward, and we maybe make some other corrective actions, not this year, but other years, in terms of conduct. Ultimately, if we were to say legalize marijuana in the state, we need to be considering how we go forward and make sure that people who have been previously convicted under the statute as it stands today were treated or are treated going forward. And so that is why I introduced this bill. I said this amendment and this bill originally, and why we had the hearing and what the people talked about at that hearing, and why I've brought it as an amendment today. And again, as I said, this is a sincere amendment that I think is something that needs to be contemplated as part of any change to the statute of the nature that is being contemplated under LB 773. And so I hope I can get everybody's support on this amendment to AM 1757. And I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll talk later.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Debate is now open. Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. Already, there's so much I kind of want to say and get to and talk about. I do think we're going to have a good discussion, including some of the context of civil rights, civil liberties, the context of what reasonable restrictions can the state do, what is the role of the state, what is all sorts of things already that just upon listening to the first three speakers I want to address. I did want to talk about, and I think it's fitting, kind of two things that I remember Senator Brewer mentioning in his introduction. One is he compared the right to own a firearm to the right to vote. And I want to just remind people that the right to vote is something that we do in fact limit and do in fact take away from individuals. Most notably, we take away from individuals convicted of a felon disenfranchisement. This is common across the country. Some states don't. Some states are much more generous with reinstatement. Some states like us are kind of in the middle. And so that's just even an example is if you hold up voting as this right and hold up gun ownership compared to that and say, well, we wouldn't ever put restrictions on voting. Colleagues, we do. We do. We put considerable restrictions on voting. We put considerable restrictions on it and continually see more restrictions in my mind being proposed and being offered. So when we start with that as the comparison, we start with that as the analogy, we're already starting with a pretty regulated and somewhat restrictive topic. That is, when we talk about a right, we've seen how that right can be limited, can have requirements put on it, can have registration requirements put on it, can have all sorts of things on top of it. Additionally, I know we'll get into this, kind of the notion of the difference between somebody who will follow the law, a law-abiding citizen, and a criminal. Colleagues, we are the body who decides where that distinction is for the state of Nebraska. And the difference between those two groups isn't a set binary that starts at birth. It's not just two groups of people. Some will always follow the law, some will never follow the law. These are people making decisions throughout their lives in any given day and can slip from one category to another. That's how this works. That's how it works. Everybody starts in the default category of law-abiding until they make a choice, they make a mistake, they make some sort of action that puts them into the other category. And that is why some of the requirements in concealed carry make sense to me, such as the training requirement and the understanding of obligations to society if we're going to say you can carry a concealed weapon. And to say that there's some people who are already going to conceal carry, concealed weapon, and we're putting restrictions on law-abiding owners. Well, law-abiding concealed carry permit owners now can, say, be stopped and frisked by a police officer, show their concealed carry permit, and get to go home. People who are stopped and frisked by a police officer, have a concealed firearm, and don't have a concealed carry permit, get the weapon seized and go to jail. I mean, we've already created a distinction between those two groups. So saying that, like, you know, one group is being burdened by the current law versus the other, we can talk about which group is truly being burdened. And in my mind, you know, it's the penalty we carry for that, in part for just collective safety. Colleagues, Senator Moorfield has already laid it out. You know, there's been some discussion that there's an amendment coming. I think it's Senator Brewer's next amendment
1 minute.
that he's worked on with some police. And I do appreciate that Senator Brewer has worked on that issue and worked with that group. I don't believe it gets my police department here in the city of Lincoln away from their opposition. And again, I don't think it even brings the Omaha Police Department on into support, just into a neutral place. And in order to do that, circling back full circle, in order to do that, to get the Omaha Police Union and police agency neutral, we're increasing criminal enhancements, which will go back to what I originally started with more people convicted of a felony and more people losing the right to vote. These all blend together in a certain way. And I understand we're going to have plenty of time to talk and discuss, but when we're talking about this balance, when we're talking about where this line falls, keep in mind that when we're using these different examples, kind of making one policy choice here, pulling on one policy lever over there is going to impact the other one. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I think I'll probably support AM 1794 from Senator John Kavanaugh and oppose LB 773. So for those of you at home with your little tally marks, you can put that on there. But I support the Second Amendment. And I think that we fall into a trap that has been a recent scourge of division on our country when we say, if you don't support a radical bill like LB 773, then you don't support the Constitution, you don't support gun rights. Everything is not black and white like that. You go through life and you have experiences and you realize that there's a lot of gray area, and there are reasonable restrictions and regulations that we put on different rights. I support the Second Amendment, and I'm also a pragmatist, and I see that we are living in a very different world here in the United States than we were living in when the Constitution was written. We've changed the Constitution so many times to better reflect the type of world that we live in. Think about the types of guns and weapons and self-defense tools that the Founding Fathers had. The framers of the Constitution could not conceive of a gun that could kill at the rate of weapons that we have today. Would the framers say that a domestic abuser buying an automatic rifle at a gun show with no background check is a well-regulated militia? Do you think when they said well-regulated militia, that's what they could have conceived of in 2022? I don't think so. I think the world has changed. And so that's why I say, let's be pragmatic about the laws that we pass and the policies that we stand for here in Nebraska. And that doesn't mean we're against the Constitution. It means we're striking a balance and we're creating policy for the world that we actually live in, not for the world of 1776. I know there are people in this body who have experience building guns illegally and giving them to others under the table. Is that a well-regulated militia? Is that what the framers intended? As lawmakers, we get to decide what the law should be. What's going to be good policy for all of Nebraskans? For one thing, with LB 773, I have a local control problem. And Senator Wayne is one who often kind of brings up the hypocrisy that we sometimes have in this body about what should be local control and then what should we control from the state level, and the imbalance between those. But I think that I'm pretty consistent on my views on local control. If AM 1757 is such a compromise amendment, why is Lincoln law enforcement still against it? It brought Omaha's law enforcement to neutral, not even supportive, and Lincoln is still in opposition. So those are issues of local control that I have a problem with LB 773. And I also think we have to recognize that unfettered access to guns and the kind of dogmatic Second Amendment absolutist view that I see as a difference of opinion. I mean, I don't think it's like wrong, quote unquote. I just don't agree with it. But the Second Amendment absolutist view that's shared by some people in this body has led to a public health crisis in this country. Gun violence is a scourge on our society, and it is a public health crisis in this state and in this country. When we can't shop or go to school
1 minute.
or worship or learn without the threat of a mass shooting, then that affects each one of us in this country. And to talk about rights, Senator Matt Hansen made the point that I was going to make about rights and voting. We put all kinds of restrictions on voting, many of which I stand against. I might be kind of a voting absolutist, colleagues. If it's okay to have a Second Amendment absolutist, you might call me a voting absolutist. I think we should let felons vote. I think we should let people vote in prison. I don't care. I think that if politicians had to care about what prisoners thought, what incarcerated people felt about policies, and had to see them as a voting bloc, we would see very different policies in this state, and they would have to weigh in on some of the problems that got them there in the first place. And that would be a really good thing, in my opinion. Smart, reasonable people can disagree with that, while recognizing that I'm still a smart, reasonable person too, and we don't agree. I think it's the right of Black women to not
Time,
be fired.
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I don't think I would have supported AM 1794 as a standalone bill, but as Senator John Kavanaugh said, if this is to pass, then we should eliminate the penalties that are associated with this currently. So I will be voting for the amendment, and I also just helping people count at home. I am opposed to LB 773, and I am opposed to AM 1757. For those watching at home, I just want to make something very clear about how you're going to see me in this debate. I am going to be very restrained in what I say. I am not going to talk about the merits or the issues with this bill. I am going to just probably read the language that's in the bill. And that is because there are people up in the balcony here that are here advocating and in support of this bill, which is fine. But we have taken zero precautions to ensure that there are no deadly weapons up there. And when we had the red flag bill here and the Capitol had lots of people in it with guns, we closed the balcony because, as I was told, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. So I don't want to do this way, but I want the people at home to understand that my voice is being impacted by the decision to not close the balcony. And Senator Hunt talked about mental health. I still to this day very much struggle with that day of hearings where I had people with loaded weapons sitting behind me as I was introducing a bill that they were opposed to. I don't object to guns. I'm not their biggest fan, but I don't object to people having the right to carry guns. I do think that they are dangerous and that people should be well protected and trained to have them. I'm just gonna, how much time do I have?
2 minutes, 20.
Okay, I'm gonna just start reading what this amendment is. So this is AM 1794. I actually don't think I have that. Oh, no, I do. Okay. For purposes of this section, concealed weapons offense means a violation of section 28-1202 as it existed on or before January 1, 2022, or attempt, conspiracy, solicitation being an accessory to, aiding and abetting, aiding in the consumption of or compounding of felony with a violation described in subdivision 1A of this section as the underlying offense. At any time following the completion of sentence or disposition, a person convicted of a concealed weapon offense or adjudicated in juvenile court for a concealed weapon offense may file a motion to set aside such conviction or adjudication. The motion shall be filed in the county, district, or separate juvenile court in which the movant, I'm not familiar with that word, was convicted or adjudicated. In determining whether to set aside the conviction, the court shall consider the behavior of the movant.
1 minute.
I'm probably mispronouncing that, so I'm sure the other Senator Kavanaugh can correct me later. The behavior of the movement after completion of a sentencing or disposition, the likelihood that the movement will not engage in further criminal activity, and any further information the court considers relevant. There shall be a rebuttal presumption that the movement is entitled to relief under this section if, as a result of the changes made in section 28-1202 by this legislative bill, the movement's conduct underlying the conviction or adjudication for a concealed weapon offense would not be a violation of section 28-1202. Section 28-1202 is amended by the legislature such that the movement's conduct underlying the conviction or adjudication for a concealed weapon offense would no longer be a violation of section 28-1202 or section 28-1202.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Several of our Omaha senators would like to welcome 13 students and 6 teachers of the Nebraska Civic Leaders Omaha Public Schools. They are located in the South Balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature? Returning to debate, Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I actually stand in support of Senator Kavanaugh's amendment. I'm on the fence with Senator Brewer's amendment, but I'm going to be asking him some questions here shortly that I hope can help clarify what the amendment actually means. I do want to say up front, and I think Senator Hunt touched down on this a little bit, when people are asked to make a column say pro, con, or neutral, I just think language like that further divides us on an issue that is already an issue that tends to divide us. I think Senator Brewer would likely be one of the first people to say that I'm a very pragmatic senator, that I actually listen to the debates, I actually read the bills, and I actually don't come to the floor often knowing exactly how I'm going to vote. I want to have something compelling said to me to let me understand and better understand why things are important. And I lived in rural Nebraska. I know why it's important for many to have guns in rural Nebraska. I know law enforcement can be far away. They need it for protection. They need it to put animals down. They need it for hunting. I get it. But I got to tell you, I got some wacky calls on this. When somebody calls me from a town of like 400 or 500 people and they're telling me they need this bill because they have thugs with guns, I want to know what's going on in rural Nebraska, guys. If you got thugs out there, I got a couple calls and that was the exact terminology that was used. So I was a little confused by that. Maybe since I moved from rural Nebraska, things have changed. You got gangs or something going on, but I don't know. With that, Senator Brewer, would you yield to a couple of not hard questions?
Senator Brewer, would you yield?
Yes, I would.
Senator Brewer, what was the NRA's opinion on AM 1757? Were they pro or con on that?
I would say they were con.
Can you walk me through why that is? I think I know why, or I wouldn't be asking that question.
Yeah, it's actually not this one. Remember, the one that I just briefed was on age 21. That one they're okay with. It's the follow-on one, which is AM 2106 is probably the one you meant.
Okay. So I know we're going to get to that. Can you kind of walk me through that?
Yes. Essentially, the issue there is they would like to see no restrictions. And that amendment would put the current gun registration in Omaha, would leave it in place with some changes.
So do you have concerns when we have a patchwork of laws across the state of Nebraska to try and appease one entity over another?
Well, I would say that that was a local control issue. They asked us to work with them. They explained some of the challenges they have and what they needed to protect their officers. And I felt obligated to work with them.
Okay, fair enough. So what about reciprocity in other states? Will folks still need to obtain permits if they want to have that reciprocity?
The reciprocity, you're going to need to have your concealed carry permit, and it has to be current and it has to be in your possession if you're going to have reciprocity in other states.
So this bill wouldn't change any of that. That's still something that they're going to have to do. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. The only thing we did is carried over all of the requirements for concealed carry with the constitutional carry. So as far as where you can take a firearm, the need to notify law enforcement or first responders, all that stays the same, so there's no confusion.
Okay. The other question I have is in reference to page 15, line 17 and 18.
One
So-
minute.
And I may have to come back and circle on that because I don't think you'll be able to answer that within a minute. So with that, I will circle back on that question. So I'm going to go back into the queue. But I still see some problematic language that I want to discuss on the mic. At this moment, I'm not sure where I stand for those who are allegedly doing the column, but I'm going to make my decision based on debate and facts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood and Senator Brewer. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 773 and AM 1757, but in opposition to AM 1794. I believe 1794 is too broad. It wasn't worked out with all parties or the introducer and needs to be worked on more, maybe over the summer if he wants to try to make an amendment. We have a handout here which talks about 21 states already recognize constitutional carry. I see that Wyoming, South Dakota, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas all have enacted this in recent years. And I think the reason is that people have finally started reading their own constitutions. And I would like to read from the Constitution of the state of Nebraska, page 1. It says, of 1875, all persons are by nature free and independent and have certain inherent and inalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the right to keep and bear arms for security or defense of self, family, home, and others, and for lawful common defense, hunting, recreational use, and all other lawful purposes, and such rights shall not be denied or infringed by the state or any subdivision thereof. So I think other states have recognized that's probably in their constitution also, and I stand in support of the Constitution in this bill. I yield the rest of my time to Senator Brewer.
Senator Brewer, you're yielded 3 minutes 10.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Clements. I got to correct some things here because, well, first off, Senator Blood is very diligent and does read through, and we all should be better at reading through bills like she does. So that's the part I agree with. Part I don't agree with is the comments by Senator Kavanaugh. Everyone was checked that went in the balcony by the State Patrol. There are no guns there. Her comments simply take away the voice of the second house. If you can't sit in this body and deal with the fact of who's in that balcony, then you shouldn't be in this body. We are here to represent our districts in the state of Nebraska. And if you can't handle the fact that some people may not agree with you, then I would really do a gut check right now, whether you're in the right place or not. All right, you've heard some of the testimony so far. I've asked the ones that truly support this bill to stay out of the queue as much as possible, because I think the ones who truly are showing their colors, and you're seeing them, they're coming to the mic and they're talking. So let's listen for a little bit. We've got lawyer, lawyer, lawyer. There are issues that people want to say about this that sound good, but aren't true. But what happens in this body, it doesn't matter whether you're telling the truth. Whatever it feels good, just go to the mic and say it. Sounds good. Someone that's listening on TV might not realize it. Then it becomes a gospel because you said it, you're a senator. When we get into the amendment, we'll talk more. But so everyone is clear on this, the second part of the amendment that we're going to announce in 2106, it covers, we'll call them all covered offenses in this amendment. A person who is committing one of those crimes would not have the right to carry concealed.
1 minute.
At this time. That means that if they are covered of one of these crimes while carrying, then you still will be charged with carrying a concealed weapon. This is not an enhancement. Now, maybe because it's a lawyer tells you that or not, but we spent a lot of time working with the city attorney in Omaha and the police to get this right. We'll talk more about why Lincoln's not in this and why they didn't come to the table. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer and Senator Clement. Senator Pansing Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, first of all, I want to, as another lawyer standing up, I just wanted to say that I truly appreciate Senator Brewer. And Senator Brewer, I just want you to know that I've been with you when you've had your guns, and there's no one in the whole world that I would rather be with than you. If there's any catastrophe, if there's any calamity, I'm running straight to Senator Brewer's house. That's for dang sure, because Senator Brewer knows what he's doing. He's been trained better than anyone. And I think that sometimes, you know, we get into a bubble, and as he said, there are lawyers standing up, and we get into our bubble. And the people who support having the concealed carry at all times also get into a bubble. And Senator Brewer is used to being with military people who are fully trained. And I'm grateful for those people. One thing I don't think you want is me running around with a gun, a concealed carry gun. Senator Brewer's smiling about that. I think he understands why. So I just would like to say that there are a number of things. I, of course, am going to repeat Heller, which I have done every time I talk about this on the mic, and conservative Justice Antonin Scalia said basically not every gun in every time at every place. I would like to read from the Heller opinion, which was later adopted and validated to the states through the McDonald versus Chicago program the McDonald versus Chicago case in 2016. Scalia said, like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. From Blackstone through the 19th century cases, commentators and courts routinely explained that the right was not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. For example, the majority of the 19th century courts to consider the question held that prohibitions on carrying concealed weapons were lawful under the Second Amendment or state analogs. They went on, he goes on to say, although we do not undertake an exhaustive historical analysis today of the full scope of the Second Amendment, nothing in our opinions should be taken to cast doubt on longstanding prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons, mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing conditions on qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. Further, Miller goes on to say, as we have explained, that the sorts of weapons protected were those in the common use at that time. So this is not an absolute right. I'm a total supporter of the Second Amendment. It's part of our Constitution. I am an advocate and will fight as hard as I can for our Constitution, for its amendments, for our democracy. But I'm very concerned if we have everyone running around with concealed carry weapons. I'm concerned about that. Senator Burr, could you answer a couple of questions?
1 minute, and Senator Brewer, would you yield?
Yes.
So, Senator Brewer, there's discussion about the common usage of weapons. Does your bill change that at all? What kinds of weapons can be concealed carried?
Well, it specifies weapons which would include handguns or knives.
Okay, does it include, could it be AK-47 under a long trench coat?
No, that wouldn't be considered a concealable weapon.
Well, I'm just checking. That's good. Okay, so it's the general common knowledge and weapons, because people talk about protecting themselves from a militia. If we're talking about bombers who would come or tanks that would come and infiltrate our country, there's a difference in the weapons that we can use, and we need to have our military, which is strong, fighting to protect us. And I just didn't know what concealed carry means.
Time, Senator.
Here.
Thank you, Senator Pansy Brooks and Senator Brewer. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so we're still on my amendment to remind people. I know everybody's got feelings and things they want to say about this issue in general, but I just wanted to kind of go back and walk through a few. And Senator Michaela Kavanaugh read part of this, and I've had some questions off the mic that I thought would be helpful for individuals. So Senator Kavanaugh read, the other Senator Kavanaugh read the portion of the statute that kind of goes through what is the process for someone to get one of these expungements. And so we already have a process in place for expungement for certain offenses, which are people who do a sentence of, are sentenced to offense for less than a year, or certain offenses that have a fine. And after you complete your sentence, and then you can come to the court after all those things, completing your sentence, paying your fines and fees and those sorts of things, you can go to the court and petition the court for a set aside and expungement. And then they take into consideration certain things, which include, as Senator Michaela Kavanaugh read, but the likelihood that the person will not engage in further criminal activity. So this is part of you go in front of a judge, you file a petition, you go in front of a judge, they sit there and they can ask questions, and you put it basically a court hearing. And then any other information they consider relevant. And then what this bill does, this amendment, AM 1794, adds that there shall be a rebuttable presumption that the movant, which is the individual asking for this relief, is entitled to relief under this section if the results and changes made to section 28-1202 by the legislature would make the conduct they were convicted of no longer a violation. So basically what it says is if the legislature chooses to make previously unlawful conduct lawful, that a person can go into court, they still have to petition, they still have to go in front of a judge, and the judge hears all of this other evidence, and on top of that, they hear this rebuttable presumption that they are entitled to this. The judge is not required to grant that relief at that point in time. That this is just adding this on top as a reason why that they should grant that relief. But what that relief means is you get this expungement or set aside and then an expungement and seal your record. It is not a pardon. It does not get people out of jail, meaning that if we repeal any sections of 28-1202, someone who is currently sitting in jail on that offense or sitting in jail when this goes into effect will not be released. No one will be released from jail as a result of passing LB 773 or AM 1794. it will not change whether or not law enforcement has access to that information. So a set aside and expungement seal, it means when you go and apply for a job or an apartment or something along those lines, that it would not show up on your record. It does not, it still means it is available to law enforcement for purposes that when they look at your criminal record, when they look at somebody's criminal record, when they pull them over, when they come into contact with them, if they are subsequently charged with some other offense, it's still available to law enforcement for that purpose. It is still available to prosecutors and the criminal justice system for purposes of enhancement and any other subsequent offenses, which we'll talk about some enhancements probably when we get to I think the next amendment to this bill or one of these other amendments that'll come down the line. But so it does not change how this person interacts with, an individual interacts with the criminal justice system, how they interact with law enforcement. It is a civil remedy because the legislature, we do not have the ability to change ex post facto, meaning after the fact. We cannot decrease penalties. We cannot change in terms of incarceration. The governor, that is reserved for
1
the
minute.
governor. Thank you, Mr. President, for things like pardons and the pardons board. So this is purely a statement that this is what we can do as a legislature when we make these sort of policy decisions, and we'll talk about that later about what policy decisions are the right ones to make or not. But when we make those policy decisions, what other things go along with that? And that is what AM 1794 is saying, that when we make policy decisions, they have ripple effects that go out into other places, and we have power to address some of those ripple effects. AM 1794 simply is doing what the legislature can to address these civil remedies, the ripple effects associated with when we take these kinds of actions. So I would appreciate, I think AM 1794 does make this a better bill. Again, talk about my issues with the bill later.
Time,
But
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise opposed to LB 773, AM 757, but I support AM 1794 because I do believe that if this bill is passed, that we should clear the records of individuals that have concealed carry violations. And I would have supported LB 773 until AM 757 became a thing, because I don't think we should carve out anything for the Omaha Police Department that discriminates against Black people in Omaha. And that is specifically why they came opposed to the bill, because they stated that this would take, if LB 773 in its original form was passed, it would take away their ability to target people in the community. This is a fact. If you didn't know, Nebraska has the 10th highest Black incarceration rate, and Black people are 9.5 times more likely to be incarcerated than white people. And people of color make up a high percentage of the individuals inside of our prisons, and our Black incarceration rate in the state of Nebraska is 50% higher than any Black incarceration rate in the United States. And I just say this to say that, at the beginning, it was like those who stand up against this are opposed to the Second Amendment. I'm not. I have a CCW permit myself. I talk to my friends and family about getting a CCW permit because as a Black person in America, it is dangerous every day to walk outside your house. But I'm not in support of allowing a police department that discriminates. Just look at the data. This is truth, and that is a fact. When you look at the data, I don't think we should be doing that. Last year, the other gun bill was ruled unconstitutional because it was pretty much a carve out for Omaha. And that amendment pretty much does the same. And I would love to see if that's unconstitutional, because if the Constitution says we should have the right to bear arms or whatever else it says, then that doesn't mean we carve out something to protect a police department that over incarcerates and discriminates against individuals, especially in my community. That's what I have a problem with. And that's what's something we have to think about. But if this bill does pass, we need 1794 to be amended onto it, because those records need to be cleared. And for another reason, we have a DNA bill that I think is sitting on final. And if that was to pass, that's something that's going to disproportionately affect people of color. So if we pass this bill without 1794, we're going to still allow the police departments to target Black people. Then we're going to allow them to target them and take their DNA. Do y'all not understand how easy it is to get a non-compliance offense or a disorderly conduct? Most of these individuals that work in the community are not culturally competent. They don't care. They're disrespectful, and a bunch of other things. So that's why I cannot support the bill. I would, but OPD likes to disproportionately target Black people, plain and simple. And that's why I can't. And that's why if this bill was to pass, we need 1794. So you could get on the internet and say, I'm opposed to the Second Amendment, but I'm not. I'm just opposed to allowing a police department to discriminate. And that's all it is, honestly. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Slama, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I rise today in strong support of LB 773, AM 1757, and in opposition to AM 1794. As a supporter of the Second Amendment, a gun owner, holder of a concealed carry permit, and since it's been brought up today, as a proud supporter of our men and women in law enforcement. I think it's important, as we're talking about constitutional carry, to get to the core of what we're talking to on the floor, and that is the text of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Those last words, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Did I miss somewhere when I was reading the Second Amendment? It's very short, the part where we're required to pay $200 and take a class to exercise those rights. Like, do we require taking a class before you exercise your freedom of religion, your freedom of speech, before you invoke the Fifth Amendment on the stand? About half of the states in the United States have some form of constitutional carry already in place. And you think that CNN wouldn't be camped out if those states that passed the constitutional carry law saw a spike in gun violence? Of course they would be. But the problem for that narrative of if you pass constitutional carry, the bad guys will have all the guns is that one, the bad guys already have access to the guns, and two, states that have passed constitutional carry have not seen an increase in gun violence. That is true almost entirely across the board, and in the states where there has been a small increase, there have been clear other issues that have contributed to that problem. And while I'm at it, I'm not going to take my full 5 minutes. In a few minutes, I'll turn over to Senator Brewer. AR, when you're talking about AR-15, it's been brought up today a few times. That doesn't mean assault rifle or automatic rifle. It means Armalite rifle, the company that developed it in the 1950s. So I'm not a lawyer yet. I'm not a constitutional expert, but I do know a thing or two about guns. And with that, I'll yield the remainder of my time to the leading expert on that subject on this floor, Senator Brewer.
Senator Brewer, you're yielded 2 minutes 40.
All right. Thank you, Senator Salama. All right. One of the issues that constantly comes up here is the issue of training. So one of the things that we got to discussion as we're trying to shape this so that the bill would be more acceptable, we went to the Nebraska Farm Owners Association and said, hey, how can we help have it in a usable way that folks can have training? And what they came back was with an idea that we could have training across Nebraska, have the training free. So they went about finding instructors. And literally, in one of the shortest periods I've ever seen, they were able to come up with 20 instructors that we can use across the state to do free training, so that if you're someone who doesn't feel comfortable with their level of training, you would be able to do it at no cost. Now, when the term is used that I support the Second Amendment, well, let me just take a deep breath and say, what does that mean to me? What that means is I teach hunter safety. I teach youth. I teach NRA members. concealed carry. You live it. You don't just say that. So understand that saying I support the Second Amendment
1 minute.
is an easy statement to make. But if you're going to actually do that, you need to take action to show that this means more than just an individual thing for you, but that you want to help others to be safe and to be well trained. And I think that's the real heart of saying that you support the Second Amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer and Senator Slama. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in full support of LB 773 without any amendments. When I look at, I've been a shooter for 30, 40 years. I love target shooting. I don't carry concealed, but I have a permit. And I appreciated the education that came with that. But at the same time, I feel that there's people that can't afford the process of going through that, and they should still have the right to carry a firearm if they so choose. I look at this as it doesn't, in the big picture, it doesn't matter if your firearm is concealed. No one will know if you have one. And that's what criminals do. They shove it in their pocket, and you don't know that they have one until they do something bad with it. And that is the whole thing here, is you can regulate this all you want, but you will not stop the criminal that has burglarized a home or a gun shop and stolen a firearm, shoved it in his waistband or his pocket. This permit doesn't matter. It doesn't stop anyone from doing that. They're going to take it into these gun-free zones. I don't think they check their gun at the door when it says no gun on the, no guns allowed. It's just like advertising. And that's the whole premise behind this. It's like it's doing something and it doesn't. It makes people feel good, but criminals don't care about any of that. And for someone who suddenly feels the need that they're in danger and wants to carry a firearm and suddenly has to go through the permitting process, that's too long. And I don't think it's again, you can have people who have a concealed carry permit do bad things with guns. That doesn't stop it either. So I fail to see the need for some of this. I really do. Until someone has done something wrong, they can lose that privilege. I agree with that. And the penalties for using a firearm or causing a physical harm with a firearm, you could extend that longer if you want. That's not what guns are for. So I do support the bill, and with that, I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator Brewer.
Senator Brewer, you're yielded 220.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Again, I wanted to pick up on where we left off with training. We want to make it so that if you want to carry concealed and you do not feel comfortable with where you are in life, with your safety skills, your handling skills, that there's a path where you can go without cost in order to get training. So right now, of those that have volunteered, we have 40 of the 49 legislative districts covered. Now, they did that in pretty short order. So I think with time, we can have enough volunteers that we have all 49 covered. So the issue of training is simply the desire of an individual to actually do the training. Now, I agree with Senator Pansing Brooks that some people should not carry concealed. The issue is if you open carry, that makes people uncomfortable. And yeah, it's your right. It's in Nebraska law. But you also put yourself at risk that someone bigger and stronger may decide to take that from you.
1 minute.
They know you have it because it's openly carried. Concealed carry gives you the ability to protect yourself and your family and do that in a way that no one else feels threatened. And again, this is a right, not a privilege. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer and Senator Friesen. Senator Morfeld, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I want to start where I left off a little bit earlier here. But first, in talking about the opposition, on the poll motion, I talked about my opposition being, well, for several reasons, but one of the reasons was not only was our police department in Lincoln opposed, but also our police union is opposed. And I thought that I should read into the record our police union letter that was in opposition, because I think it succinctly gets to the point. Regarding LB 773 opposition, Senator Brewer and members of the Judiciary Committee, the Lincoln Police Union is opposed to LB 773. This legislation would embolden criminals to carry weapons frequently and limit law enforcement's ability to prevent violent crimes. It's difficult to say how many violent crimes have been stopped from an arrest for carrying a concealed weapon, but even if it's only one, it's worth it. Our current CCW law and permit process is necessary to provide training and certification to citizens who wish to carry concealed weapons, and anything short of that would create unneeded recklessness. End of the letter. We heard testimony from the Lincoln Police Department, from the Lincoln Police Union, and other folks having extreme concerns with this. To date, I have not seen any of those folks that came in let me know that they are now in support of this legislation with the amendment. That doesn't exist. One of the agencies went neutral, but my understanding is that there's still concerns among some of the rank and file. So if we're talking about police support here, there is not police support from the folks that came in in opposition to this legislation, and there still is not support for the actual amendment. Now, you can look at the amendment as being either enhancements. I think a better way of actually explaining it is that they're new crimes, essentially. So we would be able to stack new crimes on top of those other crimes that they would be charged with. So when we're talking about prison overcrowding, we're basically creating 20 new crimes in addition to these other crimes. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Getting back to the Constitution. Again, constitutional rights are strong rights, but they are not absolute rights. The constitutional rights can have reasonable restrictions and limitations on them if there is a compelling state interest. And the Supreme Court has found time and time again, and we'll read some of the case law on that, they have found time and time again that there can be reasonable restrictions on constitutional rights. Some of my colleagues brought up voting rights earlier. As many of you know, I'm very passionate about voting rights. In Article 1, Section 22 of our Constitution, our state constitution, elections to be free. All elections shall be free, and there shall be no hindrance or impediment to the right of a qualified voter to exercise the elective franchise. Now, a bunch of folks that hold that constitutional right in our state constitution very strongly could easily say any restriction whatsoever on the right to vote is a violation of our state constitution. But we all know that that's not true. We all know that the state and the legislature, whether we like it or not, can put reasonable restrictions on constitutional rights if there is a compelling state interest. There has been a compelling state interest found with voting, whether we like that or not, in terms of allowing for there to be reasonable restrictions. And there is a compelling state interest when it comes to the Second Amendment that the court has found as well. So, colleagues, you can be in support of the Second Amendment. You can be in support of Article 1, Section 22 of our state constitution and still be in support of reasonable restrictions. That's the thing that we need to realize, recognize, and talk about. Now, if you have a strong litmus test personally as to what constitutes an Article 1, Section 22 supporter or a Second Amendment supporter, then that's fine. But I will tell you, as a person who is a gun owner, a CCW holder, owns multiple firearms, I find myself to be in support of the Second Amendment. And if I wasn't, that'd be kind of weird. I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I am also a strong supporter of having reasonable restrictions that are not overly burdensome on some of our constitutional rights when there's a compelling state interest. And if we're concerned about the permit fee and the training fee, I'm 100% in support of getting rid of the permit fee. I would prefer not to pay that. And I'm 100% in support of providing free training that is mandatory to all Nebraskans who want to conceal carry. That's an amendment I can get behind. And that's something I'm willing to work with Senator Brewer on.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morfeld. Members, Senator McAllister would like to introduce Ole Leonchuk she is an exchange student from the Ukraine, and a sponsor, Yvonne Zagers. They are seated in the south balcony. Would you please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature? Returning to debate, Senator Bostelman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have some questions from members who spoke on the mic earlier. I'm not going to ask you to answer my questions, but perhaps you could answer next time you're on the mic. One question I have, something I've been kind of noticing on bills coming up, people are amending their bills into bills that are a priority bill. On AM 1794, Senator John Kavanaugh, when he's on the mic, he can come up to me on the side. Is this bill still in committee, or is this bill on the floor? That's one question I have. Also, my understanding, if I heard it right, Senator Moorfield and Senator McKinney both said they would support LB 773 as it's written. And my question to that is, if you do, why did you vote no on the poll motion? The poll motion that was there was, or Senator Moorfield, why didn't you vote for that to come out of committee since you're on judiciary? So you can answer those questions. And I understand, I think Senator Moorfield said he doesn't vote for poll motions, but he is on the committee. Did he support it in committee to bring it out of committee? Another thing that I hear being said here is we support the Second Amendment, but. And that's what I hear a lot on the federal level as well, is we want to rewrite the Constitution. And I don't think that's right. If we support the Second Amendment, we support the Second Amendment. If it's right to bear arms, it's right to bear arms. There shouldn't be a question with that. Who carries conceal? There's a question about who carries conceal. About carrying conceal, we're concerned about carrying conceal. How do you know who's carrying conceal? How can you identify? How do you know who those people are? Because it's concealed. There may be a lot of people that are your friends or that you associate with that carry conceal. You just don't know. We're talking about also those, I think Sarah Pansy Brook brought up, some of those who are mentally unfit to carry. That's already prohibited. That's already prohibited, folks. And we're talking about training. 4-H is a great tool. I'm a 4-H shooting sports trainer. You want to see kids shoot? You want to see in our schools the kids that like to shoot and want to shoot, starting with handguns with pistols, to rifles with BB guns, 22s. Then in 6th grade, they start shooting shotguns and sporting clays and trap. You want to see 2,000 6th to 12th graders come to one location the first part of May and shoot together. You need to come out to the state high school shoot out at Donovan. 2,000 kids come out and shoot. Not one problem. Because those kids have training. Those kids in school. But you know what? We can't, schools, they won't allow us to train those kids in school. You want training? It used to be taught in schools. It's not allowed anymore. Or law enforcement. You don't even want law enforcement to have a firearm in school. When I grew up, you know what? We had a shotgun and rifle out in our car. I was trained. I went through before Hunter Ed when I was young. Those same kids get that type of training. And adults can have the same type of training. So don't say that people aren't trained, people don't know. They do. I think it's an important thing to us to understand that this is a constitutional right, and that's what we're talking about. And there's a number of states that already passed this. I yield the rest of my time to Senator Brewer, and I do support LB 773 and his amendment.
Senator Brewer, you're yielded 1 minute 15.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we should also remember that 21 states currently have constitutional carry, and there's not the end of the world there. For some reason, another 4 states decided to have it, pass it through their legislatures, and it's sitting on their governor's desk. Our governor has agreed to sign it if we can pass it through. So this isn't reinventing the wheel. This isn't coming up with something crazy. This is something that's worked in other places. They've given the rights back to the people. Let's do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer and Senator Bostelman. Senator Flood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I had the privilege of being here in 2006 when we instituted the concealed carry bill, LB 454. Senator Lathrop was here, Senator Aguilar was here, Senator Pauls was here. And I listened to probably 20 hours of debate, how the sky was falling and all of these shootings were going to happen because we were putting in a concealed carry law. I think several of you are off the mark today because you haven't read the law. Section 28-1202, 28-1202, go to that. Look at what it says. And this has been the law for a very long time in Nebraska. It says it is an affirmative defense that the defendant was engaged in any lawful business, calling, or employment at the time he or she was carrying any weapon or weapons, and the circumstances in which such person was placed at the time were such to justify a prudent person in carrying the weapon or weapons for the defense of himself, his person, property, or family. We have had permitless concealed carry in this state for decades. You're closing down the bar in a small town in Nebraska. It's dark. You've got the money going to the bank. You're a business owner. You're a bartender. You're a waitress. You can carry concealed today without a permit. An affirmative defense under Black's Law Dictionary says that if found to be credible, it negates criminal liability. Section 28-1202. Check it out on your computer. Type in or Google NRS 28-1202. You can carry without a permit right now. It is an affirmative defense. And in 2016, this legislature simply changed that same paragraph and said it shall be an affirmative defense to it is an affirmative defense. So if you want to carry concealed and you can prove that you were engaged in a lawful business, you weren't prohibited as a felon, and you're carrying concealed, this doesn't have anything to do with the Constitution right now because the law in Nebraska has been for decades that you can carry concealed without a permit. Now, obviously, what we did in 2006 was take the step of permitting so that under the way it's written now, you'd get arrested and then you'd get charged and then you'd convince the county attorney that you had a lawful reason to carry that gun because you were protecting yourself, your family. But it's broadly written. What we did in 2006 is we created a permitting process. But there were people prior to 2006 that would go to their county attorney and they would say, hey, my family's got a threat, we've got this problem. And the county attorney would write them a letter that they would show to a police officer. And that's how it worked before 2006. We are not recreating the wheel here. We are simply acknowledging what the statute has allowed us to do. We are celebrating, furthermore, the Second Amendment. And yes, I'm for the Second Amendment, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We aren't reinventing any wheels. It is the law right now in this state, and it has been for decades. 28-102 or 1202. 28-1202. I think that at the end of the day, what we're talking about is reasonable. It is in line with what our existing law has been. If you're on the fence right now and you think that you're pushing a button that's going to lead to more deaths and gun violence in the state of Nebraska, you should have been here in 2006. And I'm getting the legislative history. You would have thought the sky was falling.
1 minute.
It was tragic. The things that were going to happen when the concealed carry permit law went into place, there was going to be gunfire in the streets. It was awful. And then here we are, 16 years later, and essentially what Senator Brewer is he's making it easier for law-abiding citizens to carry concealed. And we aren't really changing the intent of what our statutes have said. And I would encourage you to go back to 28-1202 because that is the law in Nebraska and there's no permit required. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood. Senator Brewer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since it was brought up, let's talk law enforcement. Why wasn't Lincoln brought into the discussion? Well, a number of reasons. The chief spoke in the hearing, spoke very clearly that she wasn't going to support it. But more importantly, let me read some of the testimony so you understand where I'm coming from. So this is the chief of police for Lincoln, Nebraska. Allowing persons to freely carry a concealed weapon, and that means handguns, shotguns, knives, and rifles, per this legislation, will make our jobs safeguarding Lincoln more difficult. This bill will allow the criminal element of our communities to carry legally, as they may not be a prohibited person. I don't know where to begin with that. But let's jump over. Question was asked by Senator DeBoer. What is the difference between a concealed carry permit and just concealed carry without the permit in terms of what you're talking about here, Chief of Police? So when people feel when you have the current law, you don't, you have a separation. I'm reading it. I'm not stuttering here. You have a separation of the weapon from the ammunition. That's a pause in which you're going to take action. You actually have to think about it instead of removing it and just shooting. So when we talk about this, there's a moment when danger. All right, so this is the chief of police, Lincoln, Nebraska, and you can read this bill. Village idiot can read this bill and see that the rifle and shotgun is not a part of this. The other part of this is what she just described is if you're going to take your concealed weapon out and engage someone, that weapon doesn't even have ammunition in it. You have to do that first. So while you're doing that, you got to think about it. I'm sorry, but when you are so confused and out of touch that this is how you're looking at this bill, you don't get a place at the table. Because the opinion is under no condition. I guarantee you that the chief of police in Lincoln, Nebraska, just do not see a single gun owned by anyone in the town of Lincoln. That would make her life much better. So we can bring law enforcement into this because I have been talking to sheriffs all across my district, met with them this past weekend. And they would kind of like to have someone in the county carrying concealed because guess what? They have one deputy on duty. Having someone able to help law enforcement would be a tremendous asset to them. You get into this Omaha and Lincoln world where you've got huge sheriff's offices, huge police departments, and cops whenever you need them. That's a luxury that not everybody in outstate Nebraska has. The sheriffs appreciate the fact of having good citizens who are armed that can help in the event they need it. I'm not asking you to be deputized and do great things, but there are times when law enforcement are alone in the middle of nowhere and they can use some help. So understand that the voice of a few in Lincoln and Omaha, and I think you can scratch Omaha because we spent plenty of time with them trying to figure out what right looked like.
1 minute.
Now, there's some that seemed upset that we have spent time with law enforcement trying to get to a good place with them. And there's national gun organizations that have condemned me for it. Do it. Don't care. Because if we pass this law with the amendment, we lose nothing in Nebraska, and the people of Nebraska get to carry concealed. That's what this is about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Senator Albright would like to recognize 12 store and regional directors from Hy-Vee. They are seated in the south balcony. Would you please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature? Returning to debate, Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nebraska, remember that people are innocent until proven guilty. And I don't think that average citizens who aren't trained in law enforcement, who aren't trained in gun use, who kind of deputize themselves to help law enforcement to stop criminals, that's a really slippery slope to be going down. And that's not something that gives me any reassurance about LB 773, hearing that from Senator Brewer. I'm going to give some time to Senator Moorfeld, who wants to respond to the question Senator Bostelman had of him. And also, colleagues, I'd be happy to take anyone's time. So I just wanted to make a couple points. I support the Second Amendment because I support a well-regulated militia. It's not a but. I support the Second Amendment, and I support the part of the Second Amendment that says well-regulated militia. Everyone's holding up the Constitution and reading their favorite little part of an amendment and ignoring some other part of the amendment. As Senator Moorfeld pointed out, maybe you could call me a voting absolutist, as some people call themselves Second Amendment absolutists. There are other amendments. Some of you who think everyone should have the right to have a gun with no training, with no background check, because that's what you interpret the Constitution to say, you want to put miles of restrictions on people to exercise their right to vote. So don't start with me on rights. I'm not afraid of people with guns, just like I'm not afraid of people voting. Just like I'm not afraid of gay people having a job. I'm not afraid of Black women, with their natural hairstyles working a job either. I'm not afraid of women who know what's best for themselves and their bodies deciding to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. I'm not afraid of trans people or trans children who need gender-affirming care. So don't tit for tat on what's a right and what we're afraid of. And also don't start on what has worked in other places, because all kinds of things work in other places that we don't do here in Nebraska. Emergency rental assistance, for example, worked fine in 48 other states, but it's not right for Nebraska. That's a load of crap. Paying workers more than $2.13 an hour, that would work fine in Nebraska too. It works better, it works fine a lot of other places. Allowing insurance to cover in vitro fertilization for people who want to start a family and are having trouble, that would work great in Nebraska too. So don't say, like any of us are the arbiter of authority of rights. That's why we have courts. Smart people can obviously disagree about rights. And if something is unconstitutional, we don't just introduce a new law to fix that. Those things get resolved in the courts, not in the legislature. And I'll yield the remainder of my time to Senator Moorfeld.
Senator Moorfeld, you're yielded 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Hunt. I just want to respond. I talked to my colleague, Senator Bostelman, off the mic just to correct the record, I should say. We can also create the record too. But to correct the record in that I have not supported the underlying bill, LB 773. We have not had a committee vote on this bill. We have not execed on the bill. So I just want to note that right away. Now, in terms of a potential amendment, if we were to create a white copy amendment to the bill, eliminate the fee for applying for the permit, and also create a free training program across the state, I would be in favor of something like that. I'm going to read over the testimony from the Lincoln Police Chief. I need to review that myself. But I don't know. I may take issue with the thought that our police chief is confused and out of touch.
1 minute.
Even if that were the case, I don't think our Lincoln Police Union, our rank and file police officers, are confused and out of touch. And as I read from their letter, they have pretty strong feelings about this. And the other police agency and the other police union that came in opposition, the Omaha Police Union, while they are now neutral, they're not in support. Neutral is different than support. And so there are still concerns with this legislation from our law enforcement community where gun violence is the highest. And that's why I remain to be concerned by this. And I remain a strong Second Amendment supporter. And I remain a strong Second Amendment supporter that, like all of our constitutional rights, there can be reasonable restrictions on them. There's even reasonable restrictions on free speech. You can't go into a crowded theater and yell fire. That's not a constitutional right. There can be reasonable restrictions on constitutional rights when
Senator.
there is a compelling state interest. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morfeld and Senator Hunt. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized. Excuse me, before you speak, Senator Lathrop, we have some items to read in.
Mr. President, first of all, the Appropriations Committee will hold an executive session under the north balcony at 11 o'clock. In addition to that, your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 436, 698, 769, 804, 820, 840, 864, 887, 998, 1065, and LB 1246, in addition, LR 283CA, all placed on final reading. Committee on Enrollment Review also reports Legislative Bill 1112 to select file with amendments. New A Bill 910A offered by Senator McDonald would appropriate funds to carry out the provisions of Legislative Bill 910. Amendments to be printed to 1045 from Senator McAllister and Senator Matt Hansen, Senator DeBoer, an amendment to 741, Senator Brandt to 741, Senator McAllister to 1150, and Senator Michaela Kavanaugh to LB 91. That's all I have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returning to debate, Senator Lathrop, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. Good morning. You know, when we get to these bills where people feel so strongly, it makes for a tough day. And I very much appreciate how strongly Senator Brewer feels about this bill. I understand being committed to legislation you've been working on for a long time. I have a great deal of respect for how strongly he feels about it and his advocacy for his belief and in particular this bill. So it makes the debate on these things kind of difficult. I hope we avoid getting to a place where it becomes a personal thing. It certainly isn't for me. It's a lot easier for me as a lawyer and in particular a trial lawyer. I've had a lot of cases with a lot of lawyers over the years, and I win some and I lose some, and I can still go out and have a drink with most of them. And that's sort of the culture, or should be the culture in here. We're talking about concealed carry. I have been here long enough to watch the transformation of concealed carry law in Nebraska. Right before I got here, it was the first iteration of this regulation was counties may, or the cities may permit people to carry concealed. And so then we had some counties that had it and some that didn't. And the folks that wanted to carry concealed came in and said, we can't even understand where we can carry a gun, where we can't. We need a statewide standard. So we set up the permit process statewide and set up the process of acquiring a permit so that there would be a statewide standard. And now we're at what I would call the final version, or the furthest point at which you can get in the subject of legislation on concealed carry. Here we are. Over the years, I've watched and I've been through, having served 12 years on Judiciary Committee, I've sat through a lot of concealed carry permit debates and bills that have introduced. And the one thing that I've heard over the years, we had a bunch of shootings in large churches, mega churches, somewhere outside of Nebraska, and in came a bill to allow people to carry concealed into a mega church because they were going to help sort of as an extension of law enforcement. And we also had a bill, I think Senator Christensen introduced it, that said, we need people in small towns, we need teachers in small towns because they may be teaching in a school far away from law enforcement and the response times. And again, this morning, Senator Brewer noted, and I believe this, that law enforcement in communities, sheriffs with only a few deputies, appreciate the fact that there are armed, thoughtful citizens in their community, and that the cops don't have to be everywhere in places like Sheridan County and places they simply don't have the manpower to cover the geography. And what that suggests to me, and maybe the concern that it brings me to, is the notion that someone with a concealed handgun is somehow an extension of law enforcement. Can they be helpful in a circumstance where their own life is being threatened? Certainly. But the notion that they are an extension of law enforcement is a concern in this respect. Currently, the permitting process requires that someone undergo a certain amount of training. That training is prescribed by the State Patrol in State Patrol regulations
1 minute.
that have been passed. I have a concern for people who will get a handgun without a permit, without any training, and I appreciate, Senator Brewer, that there are people willing to train for free, but they're not required to take it. So I could go into Cabela's, pick up a handgun, and with no training, and I'm a lawyer. I understand self-defense. But there is a lot of nuance, and we see an awful lot of people who, with a firearm, are doing things they don't have the legal right to do, and somebody gets killed. And now they're charged and doing a life sentence. I do find value in the permit process that screens who may and may not, and I find value particularly in the training, so that we don't have citizens picking up a handgun and getting
Senator.
themselves in trouble. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that Senator Brewer please yield to a question we started earlier.
Senator Brewer, would you yield?
Yes.
So Senator Brewer, can you kind of walk me through the language on page 15, line 17 and line 18? I don't remember seeing that anywhere else in statute. And can you just kind of give me a little bit of history on why it's written that way?
I'm assuming that you know the answer, so 15
I
and
actually
16?
don't this time. That's why I was hoping you could help me out. So minor, any person who is under 21 years of age, except if they're 18 and they're in the military, peace officer. I understand why you would do that, but I'm not seeing that anywhere else in statute. How did we get that language? And I'm just trying to understand why it's an either or.
Okay, actually, that was scratched. So in the amendment AM, what was the first one? 1757, that goes to age 21, period.
Okay, 1757. And then next year, you and I need to go into chapter 14 and look at that language. They use words like common prostitutes, vagrants, and tramps. I don't know if you noted that.
Actually, I didn't.
Not to take you off topic, but
Okay.
I think that's some pretty antiquated language. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
So do the amendments, and I know we have more than one amendment, I know this is going to be decreased revenues, and they weren't sure if they're going to exceed the decreased reductions. Can you kind of walk me through any potential shortfall and how it might offset their budget? Because I did note in the fiscal note said that they may need to come forward and ask for more money in the future. Do you think that that's true, or do you think that they're overcompensating?
Okay, when you say that, is that for the State Patrol, for the reduction in the number of permits that they would?
It is. I'm sorry. It is. I should have been clearer.
Okay, no, we're good. We're on the same sheet here. It is unknown what we found from researching with Wyoming. The year after they went to constitutional carry, the number of their concealed carry permits increased dramatically, almost doubled. That's not true in every state. There's usually a dip the first year, and then they come back up and are usually higher than they were before. So I think that's kind of an unknown exactly where that'll go. I think it depends on the state.
I did note Kansas was one of the ones that was used. I thought they said like 30%. Does that sound right? Did I read that?
I think that's ballpark, yes,
Okay.
27.
So why did it go up in that second year?
Well, I think what happens is there's folks that have not entertained the idea of being armed, and then they realize that this is possible through this legislation, and so they decide that they need to get training, and that's a quick, direct, preset training that they can go and get. and that's why they go to get it. Training becomes more valuable because you realize the impact of the actions that you may have to take with the gun.
And it's better to know what the heck you're doing when you have a gun in your hand.
Oh, yes.
And it's a lot more fun, too.
Yeah, well,
All right.
it's an
Thank you,
option.
Senator Brewer.
You bet.
So again, I'm still listening to debate, still going through the many amendments, going back and forth. I actually support Senator Kavanaugh's amendment. I don't think we need more people in prison, and I'm not sure why we would have an amendment that would make the rules harsher. I'm a little concerned about the patchwork part of it. So I'm still listening, I'm still deciding, but I do really appreciate Senator Brewer walking me through some of my questions. And I know I kind of get into the weeds and really fine tune sentences, but when it's something so serious,
1 minute.
so serious to people, I want to make sure that we do it and we do it correctly. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood and Senator Brewer. Senator Walls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't stand up and talk very often. I haven't much this year, but out of respect for Senator Brewer, I wanted to stand up and just kind of ask a few questions and tell a story. I do stand in opposition to LB 773. And Senator Pansy Brooks, you will have to beat me to Senator Brewer's office if something happens, because I will be running way faster than you. And I would do that because I trust Senator Brewer. I trust him because I know that he has had extensive training. I've never been in the service, and I can't even pretend to understand what it's like. I can take the experiences that I've heard from people who have served our country or who have spent time on base, even spending time on base, or people who have been deployed. What I do know is that there is an unbelievable amount of stress. There's emotional and physical stress. There's mental stress. There's marital stress. There's fighting. There's bullying. There's abuse. There's deployment. There's post-traumatic stress. You are up against a very, very high level of stress in an atmosphere where hundreds of people could easily lose control in so many situations. And honestly, when I think about that, I think it's amazing that there really is so much self-control in a place where there's such a high level of stress. Senator Brewer, would you yield to a question?
Senator Brewer, would you yield?
Yes.
How does that happen? How does it happen that there's not more bloodshed just on the base, given there's so much stress?
Well, unfortunately, when incidents happen, it's normally suicide. And, the suicide is something we haven't been able to overcome. It is a reality of enough of a, environment of stress and death and the issues that sometimes come with wearing the uniform. And some folks just cannot deal with it. And that, unfortunately, is something that we just have not had the ability to overcome. And, I don't talk much about it. I don't know that there's really anybody on the floor that I've spent time talking about, because it's just not something you really want to talk about. The experience of being shot is something that haunts you. So understand, I don't take any of this lightly. The idea of ever being in a position to have to shoot someone, or the fact that being shot and understanding what it's like to be on the other side. And, that is part of the ghost I mentioned earlier that stays with you for life.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. I don't think that owning a gun is a problem, honestly. For me, it's understanding the responsibility and the self-control and the training that's an issue. I think so much about that large amount of stress our military men and women are under. and the control they have over how they use their weapon.
1 minute.
And I compare all those people to people who just decide that someone's driving too slow or they've been cut off on the road. And they decide that that's the time to use our gun because someone has an argument with another person. That's the time to use our gun. It's also a little personal, and I don't know if I have enough time. But I do have someone who's very, very close to my heart who served in the Army and was deployed. And this is a person I love very, very much, who went through some pretty traumatic times. A lot of personal trauma, a lot of mental health issues, spiraling out of control pretty quickly. And there were many, many times he could have decided today is the day I use my gun. But he didn't. And I believe he didn't.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Walls and Senator Brewer. Senator Pansing Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought if Senator Walls wants to finish what she was saying, I'll yield. Let's see. I'll ask Senator Walls a question so I can finish.
Senator Walls, would you yield?
Yes.
Would you please finish what you were saying, and then I'll make my comments.
So there were many times that this person was spiraling out of control because of the traumatic things that were happening in his life. And we were really afraid that that was the day he was going to say, today I use my gun. And I don't think he did. I don't think he did only because of the training that he received and the knowledge of how to use a gun and the self-control that he learned while he was in the Army. So as his mother, I'm thankful for the fact that he had the opportunity through his service in the Army to be trained and to use self-control. Because without it, I don't think his circumstances would be the same that they are today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that, Lynn, for your brave story. I appreciate that. And we send you all of our love. So as we know, this is difficult for everybody in many instances for all of us. I appreciate Senator Wall's willingness to come forward and tell stories that are so difficult and heartrending. We appreciate Senator Brewer, who is a true hero amongst us. I don't think there's probably anybody in this or think has more sense on so many things, and he really has been a joy and an honor to work with, in my opinion. I'm getting sentimental about things as I'm nearing the end of my 8 years here. But I do want to just point out that there is a case right now pending in front of the Supreme Court. And that case is New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Inc. versus Bruin. The Supreme Court is going to be ruling soon on concealed carry. Anybody remember back when Senator Moorfeld and I had been bringing the workforce equity bill, and everybody said, oh, just wait, the Supreme Court's going to rule on LGBTQ plus in the workforce. That was the Obergefell case. They were going to rule on marriage. And they ruled. Everybody had said, oh, just wait for that time, because that's when the Supreme Court's going to make a decision, which they have done. The marriage now is legal between two people of the same sex. And we have the same instance here, but I don't hear those same people saying to us or to Senator Brewer, just wait. Just wait. The Supreme Court is going to rule on this soon. It's all about concealed carry, and we should wait. But nope, we have to move forward on this. I would also like to say that I agree with what I've been hearing. Let's just pay. This is a Second Amendment right to our Constitution. Let's pay for the classes. I don't want people wandering around without classes and without training.
1 minute.
That office of Senator Brewer's has some of the most capable and knowledgeable people in this area that I know. I admire them. I don't totally agree with them, but I admire each of them. And I have a lot of fun with them. But I bet we would all agree on the fact that we need training for people. Why doesn't the state pay for that? It's a constitutional right. Let's pay for the training. If the training's the issue, then let's, by gosh, get people the training they need. I think that's the way to solve this. I'll support this if we get training and if we get people able to get the work that they need and the training. And, you know, we hear about Senator Brewer and the people that have been in the military. That's all training. That is all training. That's my sticking point. I am supportive of the Second Amendment. I am not a gun owner.
Time, Senator.
But I believe in
Thank you,
training.
Senator Pansy Brooks and Senator Walls. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just to remind everybody, we're still on my amendment, and although it's my last time to talk, I just wanted to make sure that I got to discuss all things because I've talked to quite a few people off the floor, and then people don't, I guess, quite understand what the intent of my amendment is. And so I've gone through kind of the mechanism before. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. But basically, somebody, if we change conduct, previous convicted conduct is found to not be unlawful any longer, that would add that as an element. Someone could seek an expungement. Expungement and set aside is already in the statute for offenses like this. This just adds an extra level to that makes sure that we're basically stating a principle that says once we've decided this is no longer unlawful, that gives more weight to someone's request for that expungement and set aside. And again, this expungement and set aside does not make that prior conviction available for subsequent enhancement on if any subsequent criminal offense were to arise out of later conduct. So it is still available for prosecutors and law enforcement. It would still be available for police to look at somebody's record. And I point that out again because I would point out that law enforcement came and testified against this amendment, or well, I guess they sent a letter in opposition to it. And I don't understand their opposition, and I just thought that was interesting to note in light of Senator Brewer's comments about certain law enforcement being opposed to the underlying bill here and suggested amendments that we're considering. I obviously have respect our state's law enforcement. I respect their opinion as it pertains to their professional industry. And, I think a lot of people are talking about their concerns rightly as it pertains to making these sorts of changes to the concealed carry statute in the state. And Senator Pansy Brooks, I think, just pointed out a important point about the distinction between safety with training and no training and education. And those valid concerns, complaints, criticisms, I think I agree. My point is, in this amendment, and since I guess it's my last time to talk before closing and getting to vote on it, but that when we make a policy decision, whatever nature it takes and whatever your position about the policy decision is, whichever side you're on this issue and any other issue, that a policy decision requires us to also consider all of the things that go along with that. And so in the criminal justice system, we make a lot of decisions about penalties, in lengths of incarceration, the civil penalties afterwards, whether people can get SNAP benefits after they have served their sentence and been convicted, whether people get the right to vote restored, whether or not people can own or possess a firearm. All of those things are policy decisions that we have made. And sometimes when you make a change in a policy decision, that you need to make sure that you are addressing all of those other sort of dominoes that we have put in place as a result of criminalizing conduct, incarcerating people, punishing people, and whether or not people should, whether it's a good policy choice to make people carry the stigma of a criminal conviction with them for the rest of their life.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Once we have made a decision to roll back a previous policy decision, once we've changed our mind about whether or not something is unlawful conduct, whether or not we should, that when we make those changes, we should consider, it should be part of that conversation, whether or not we continue to treat people, penalize people to have them have that stigma with them for the rest of their life for that conduct. And so that is a consideration. That's why I think it's an important part of this conversation overall. And I think it's an important part of any conversation we have is not just what is the letter of the law change we're making, but all of the other things that go along with that. And that's why I brought this amendment. And that's why I think it should be part of the conversation going forward and why it should be adopted as part of this bill if this bill does were to advance. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Day, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. So for me, there's a couple sticking points on this issue. The first one being the poll motion. I was just outside the chamber talking to a young man named Jason who took the day off today to come and advocate for this bill. And we got to have a conversation about how important the process is for each one of these bills when we circumvent the committee process by utilizing a poll motion. From my perspective, it eliminates a really important part of the process for those of us who don't sit on the committee. Particularly, we don't have a committee statement. We don't know how many people came in support or opposed. And we don't know what we call the second house said, which is the general public. That's one of the problems that I have. The second issue is Amendment 1757, which I really, really don't like for a couple of reasons. The first thing is, if we want to pass a bill based on the premise that the right to keep and bear arms is a constitutional right, that should apply to every single Nebraskan in the state. We can't say this shall not be infringed unless you live in Omaha. Then it's okay for us to create a carve out for the city. I appreciate Senator Brewer working with law enforcement on finding a compromise for this. And I do think that that's very important, and I don't fault him for that, but I personally don't like the compromise that it has come to in terms of carving out Omaha, which personally, I don't think it's surprising to understand that the city of Omaha is the city in the state with the highest population of Black Nebraskans. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're carving them out. And I would echo some of Senator McKinney's sentiments on that issue. I was doing a little bit of research on this, and I found a really great article in the Chicago Sun-Times written in January 26th of 2021 titled, "How Second Amendment Gun Rights Fall Short for African Americans." And I'm going to read it here into the record. It was described as a standoff. Congressman Lauren Boebert recently refused to permit Capitol Police to search her purse after she set off a metal detector. She now avoids the Capitol metal detectors entirely, so far without consequence. The Second Amendment is allowing her to get away with a lot. Boebert's not alone in carrying a gun. According to data gathered from the FBI, 15 million guns were purchased between January and July 2020, marking a 91% increase from the same period in 2019. More than 30% of American adults claim to own a firearm. What is different now is that the largest rise in gun sales in 2020, nearly 60%, has been among African Americans who increasingly fear that they can't rely on law enforcement for safety. Gun ownership comes with many risks, but these new gun owners should be given an additional warning. In practice, the Second Amendment right of African Americans is limited. Nothing in the Constitution restricts gun ownership by ethnicity, of course, but in reality, the Second Amendment doesn't apply equally to people of color who are often killed while trying to fully exercise their right to keep and bear arms to defend themselves or protect others. Take the story of Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, neither of whom had criminal records. When 3 men in street clothes attempted to break through their door at 1 o'clock in the morning, Walker grabbed his registered firearm. When the men broke down the door, he fired a single shot in self-defense. The men, whom he later learned were police, fired back several rounds. They shot Walker, arrested him for attempted murder, and killed Brianna. There are other cases that illustrate the same point. Take Philando
1 minute.
Castile, who during a traffic stop alerted the officer that he carried a registered gun in a vehicle, but was shot and killed by police before he could explain. Then there's the 26-year-old security guard from Illinois, Jamel Robertson, who apprehended a dangerous armed man at gunpoint, but he was shot immediately by police when they arrived on the scene. Similarly, a heroic Amantic Bradford helped to protect the crowd from a lone gunman in an Alabama shopping mall. Yet the 21-year-old who was lawfully carrying a firearm was shot and killed by police. I'll finish my article later. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Day. Senator Geist, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I did have a question for Senator Brewer, if he would yield for a question.
Senator
Please.
Brewer, would you yield?
Yes.
I had a constituent contact me, and I know we talked about this offline, but I wanted to have this question answered for the record. I had a constituent contact me about reciprocity and how this would look when you take a gun to other states, if they would recognize, if we have permitless concealed carry, how that would look if you take a gun to other states.
Well, if you left Nebraska under just constitutional carry, that's where it would end, is when you got to the border. If you have a permitted concealed carry, then it would be recognized in any of the other states that we have an agreement with. So in order to travel across state lines, you would have to have the full permitted concealed carry.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's important for us to know, that that this concealed carry only is in effect in the state of Nebraska and not in other states. Another thing that we've been talking about is training. I am engaging some other of my colleagues in talking about possibly having free online 4-hour training. It could be online or in person, because Senator Brewer says he has 20 instructors who are already willing to give that for free. So it'd be free, it would be online or in person, and you could print out a certificate right there after you finish the course, carry it with you. And I just think that could be a good compromise for those of you that want training. Something maybe we could talk about, I do have an amendment coming. If people are interested, we could do that. So it's 4 hours, online or in person. It's free. You could print out your certificate right there, or have that be provisional and you get one from the state. I know that there's a lot of questions that need to be answered about that, but I think it's a good middle road and alternative for those who are having trouble getting on board because there's no training. So with that, I'm happy to engage my colleagues off the mic and discuss that further if you're interested. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Geist and Senator Brewer. Senator Lowe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand here in support of LB 773 and AM 1757, and I am opposed, or still listening at least, to 1794. Innocent until proven guilty. The senator said that we are innocent until proven guilty. As you carry your weapon, you are assumed you're guilty by a lot of the people here. We are talking about good citizens legally carrying a firearm or a knife, whereas it is concealed, because we don't want to alarm anyone, because obviously we are alarming people today by even speaking of this bill. We're talking about the good citizens of Nebraska doing this. We're not talking about those who would do harm to other citizens that are already carrying concealed weapons unlawfully. We want to talk about training. I hunted up until I was in college, and I enjoyed hunting and carrying a weapon with me most everywhere I went. Matter of fact, when I bought my first pistol, it took me an average of about 5 minutes to walk in the store, to pick it up, and walk out. There was little regulation at that time. Signed a few papers, got the numbers off the pistol, and I walked out, and I was shooting later on that afternoon. But we're talking about training, and I have my concealed carry permit. Not carrying today. I don't need to. We have redcoats here. We have law enforcement officers around. I am very safe inside this building. My wife was attacked 2 years ago. Broad daylight at noon in the city of Lincoln. The fellow that did that is still out wandering around somewhere. The Lincoln Police Department was wonderful. They tried very hard for 6 months to find that man. Attacked at noon, broad daylight in downtown Lincoln. She laid unconscious on the concrete after the attack on the sidewalk. Why do we need concealed carry? There were 6 young men across the street that ran to her aid and then tried to chase that man down. They could not catch him. Sobering fact that 6 young men could not catch this perpetrator. Now, that man was not armed. The only thing he used was a building to hit my wife's head to, and then the concrete sidewalk when she hit the ground. She had a concealed carry permit. That wouldn't have helped. He hit her from behind. But if there might have been somebody walking along that street that saw this and held up that man for just an instant for these 6 young men to catch him, it would have made a world of difference to both me and my wife.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. In 2019, I proposed LB 542, which would have been a tax credit for firearm training, up to $100. So your training, if you pay taxes, would be free up to $100. It did not pass. So the option was there for training of people. Like I said, I hunted up until college. I dropped out. I didn't hunt until my children reached an age where I thought their friends would be hunting. And so it was my job then to teach my children, my 3 boys, on how to handle a gun, a pistol, a rifle, and a shotgun responsibly, so that nobody would ever get hurt.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator Slama, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. I rise still in support of LB 773 and Senator Brewer's amendment. And I see debate today taking 2 turns, and I really do just want to touch on both of those sides of the tree of argument against this bill. One's the policy argument, and the other is the emotional side. So policy-wise, I think if you zoom out and you look at the facts of what this bill would do and the evidence behind other states who've implemented constitutional carry, you will see very clearly that there has not been an increase in gun violence in those states that have implemented constitutional carry. The sky is not falling in opposition to what some may be portraying to you. What this bill does is it simply adds another layer of protection to those who need it. Senator Geist raised an interesting concept about a potential compromise. but I am a bit concerned that those who are making policy arguments and just asking questions about technical things on the mic, that's a very common filibuster strategy. And it's a really good sign of someone if you're complaining about, well, the process, or, well, what does this word mean on page blank, line blank? That's a really good sign that you're not operating in good faith, you're not willing to negotiate, and you may end up just killing the bill just to spite it. So I am interested to see who on this floor is interested in negotiating in good faith. We've got about 6 hours if anyone is interested in a compromise. I know Senator Brewer's working it, Senator Geist is. And on the policy side, I'm grateful Senator Brewer brought up what happened in the hearing for LB 773, particularly with the Chief of Police of Lincoln. And I would like to review that transcript because that does lead me into the emotional side of my argument. The Chief of Police of Lincoln referenced the need to call 911, which everybody on this floor recognizes. When there's an emergency situation, you call 911. Senator DeBoer asked her to clarify a statement she had made about people with guns choosing not to call 911. And her response was, yeah, I mean, look, I am a believer in the Second Amendment. Absolutely. I know some people might have feelings. I've been here for 5 months. I know, but I am from California. But, you know, I do believe in the Second Amendment, and calling 911 is absolutely something we need to do if you feel there is danger and if you need help. No, we've done a great job in Lincoln. The officers here are tremendous, but if we're not calling 911 to those officers to come out and do what everyone is describing as far as taking action, that's just not good policy to have. And that leads me into the emotional side of my argument, because everybody on this floor knows that there's situations that can happen where you are deciding between staying alive and picking up your cell phone and seeing if you can type out 911. And using force is something we are already allowed to do in the state of Nebraska. So to see those comments coming from the Chief of Police, the Lincoln Police Department, to say that unless we're mandating somehow calling 911 before you fire in a life or death situation, that is scary to me. Because Senator Lowe's wife is one of my very good friends. And in 2019, when I took office, I decided I needed a concealed carry permit after I had been followed several times back to my car in downtown Lincoln. I've been through violent experiences before. I'm a very small person. I'm trained in self-defense. I can put up a really good fight. But at the end of the day, a grown man is going to kick my butt 9 times out of 10. And I thank God that I have my concealed carry permit and I can conceal carry where it's legally allowed for me to do so. Because you never know when you're going to be walking in downtown Lincoln and get thrown into a brick wall.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And that's something I have to live with. Every single woman, every single person has to live with. And we have a constitutionally protected right to defend ourselves with force as necessary with guns. And I think LB 773 is a wonderful bill. Senator Brewer has worked with police departments across the state to bring this bill. And I'm wholeheartedly on board. Again, if you're interested in compromising, please come to the table, because what I'm seeing right now is a lot of people not in good faith getting on the mic and filibustering a bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Seems like Groundhog Day again. I recall a similar bill my first year at LB 68 that I got a lot of flack for because I voted to support it on cloture. I like the underlining bill. I do not like the amendment at all. I'm in a unique spot where half of my district is outside of the city limits of Omaha. So every time people who are north of the city limits drive into the airport, they're actually violating the law when they have their handgun because they haven't registered with the city of Omaha. So it puts me in a weird position when you have areas outside of the city of Omaha in a district, but they often travel to the city of Omaha. So it's always been weird in that situation. I am a avid gun owner. I carry every day, sometimes 3 times a day. I just believe in it. And after I represented the Skurlock family, many of you know that I received a lot of threats and my house became a mini bunker with lots of fun toys in my house as far as guns. So the point of it is I like the underlining bill. I do not like the amendment at all. I do like Senator Kavanaugh's amendment. If you're going to say this is a fundamental right for all, then you need to remove convictions for those who've been convicted previously. I just don't like the amendment that was offered by the OPD. I watched the testimony, and it really came down to they wanted to bump, what we call bump up people in North Omaha and South Omaha, and I don't appreciate that at all. So with that, I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator Kavanaugh, John Kavanaugh.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're yielded 3 minutes 10.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. And just reminded me, and when you're talking, Senator Wayne and I, when I was a new lawyer starting out, my very first motion to suppress was a concealed carry case with Senator Wayne, was co-counsel. We had co-defendants in that case, and it was about a gun that was found in a car that was under the seat. And so we had a motion to suppress about a number of issues on that case. And ultimately, only one of the individuals in that vehicle was convicted of that gun. But I digress, but it just reminded me of Senator Wayne and I having deja vu, speaking of deja vu. So I appreciate Senator Wayne's comments, and that there was, and again, I have a similar, I guess, position to Senator Wayne. I'm generally, I think, not a person who's going to be in favor of relaxing gun laws, and for a number of reasons. And like I said, I will talk about those after my amendment. But the reason I saw Senator Brewer brought LB 773, and I saw the bill, and I will say, lukewarm about it. I hadn't made up my mind about where I was going to be, but I thought my immediate reaction was, oh, well, this is a good opportunity to have this conversation and to make sure if we do go down this path, that it includes this sort of corrective action. And so that's why I brought my bill and now this amendment. And so I say this, and I know a lot of people don't believe when we're having these long conversations, and why I keep talking about this, and we're still on it. This is a sincere conversation about what we should be. One of the things I know, we have a lot of things we need to talk about on this issue, and I appreciate everybody having the different perspectives people bring to this conversation, and what it is are important about this issue to people. But to me,
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the most important things we talk about is what effect our laws have on the individuals they seek to regulate, the conduct they seek to regulate, and what happens when we make changes to those laws, and whether we increase the penalties, which some people suggest, and sometimes, and if you read the Omaha World Herald, and I can pull up the article later, they've had a great series about previous actions of this legislature, of this body, changing gun laws that disproportionately affected certain people in our state, and is one of the reasons leading to our prison crowding crisis that we're facing right now. And so that needs to be part of every conversation we have about laws, about crimes, about punishment, needs to be about what happens to the individuals whose conduct we have criminalized, or we are decriminalizing, or people who we have previously said criminalized their conduct.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Wayne. Senator Morfeld, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. A few things. One, in terms of compromise, I'm open to compromise. I've had one person come up to me and talk to me about potential compromise, and I outlined where I would be personally. I would have to talk to other colleagues, but where I would be personally on some of the proposals that individual came to me with. So I'm open to compromise. And the person that came up to me, I told them I'm open to it, and that here's where I would have to be able to get on board. We would still have to have some type of permitting process. There would still have to be a background check. There would still have to be some kind of training. But I'm totally fine with getting rid of the permit fee and any training fee. I'm open to it being online. I know some of my colleagues are not open to it being online. They think it should be in person. But I remain committed to compromising. I mean, I've got a lot of other things, quite frankly, that I could be doing right now. for my job, my full-time job. There's a lot of things I could be doing for my campaign right now too. So I don't take a ton of pleasure in sitting here and debating this at length, but I will tell you that I do think, based on what I'm hearing from not only our Lincoln Police Chief, but also the frontline officers that represent our police union, what I'm hearing from them is that this is a dangerous proposal. And what I heard from the Omaha Police Department when this was first introduced is that this is a dangerous proposal. And granted, they're neutral now, but that's not in support. And so I am absolutely 100% open to compromise. And I've just outlined where we would need to get for me to be in support. Now, that doesn't mean that all of my colleagues are in support that are also have concerns about this legislation. But listen, I don't like paying that permitting fee to exercise my right. I don't like having to pay for the training as well. I think the permit's important. I think the training's important. I'm open to making it more accessible and making it online. And I'm open to getting rid of all the fees associated with that. That's personally acceptable to me. And I think that that's, quite frankly, a good middle ground, because a lot of the discussion that has been brought up has been about barriers to a constitutional right, which this is, and access to it. And I'm okay making it more accessible. And I'm okay bringing down some of those barriers. But what I'm not okay with is getting rid of a permitting requirement and a background check requirement that my Lincoln police officers say is important to the public safety, number one, but to their safety as well. You know, I want to talk a little bit in depth about, and I'll have to get back on the mic on this because I'm still reviewing the statute that Senator Flood brought up in terms of affirmative defense, but that's simply an affirmative defense. And we'll get into the language in a little bit and talk a little bit about that, but that's an affirmative defense in some situations, in some circumstances. So that doesn't mean that that's already the case. This is already the law. We're just getting rid of an unnecessary requirement. It's simply an affirmative defense, much like what we've done with Good Samaritan laws and other things. And so that doesn't negate the need or the value of having this process. So colleagues, we are debating this. I think we can bring up questions and ask about language in good faith. And I've been here the entire morning, sitting at my desk, thinking about what I'm going to say next, bringing up facts. I'll also bring up what happened in other states. There's actual studies of what happened in other states after passing what's known as constitutional carry. This is really just, constitutional carry is kind of just a catchy name for this. This is really just getting rid of the background check and permitting and training requirements for concealed carry. And so we'll get into some of the data in terms of what happened after other states passed this law, because there is some emerging data around that. And gun crime has gone up. Officer-involved shootings have gone up in states where they've passed these laws. So these concerns from law enforcement are not unfounded. They're not just made up. They are concerns that are grounded in reality and fact, and I think we should respect that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Moorfield. Senator Flood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. As luck would have it, Senator Moorfield, I'm right after you. And so let's talk about Section 28-1202. And would Senator Moorfield yield to a question?
Senator Moorfield, would you yield?
Yes.
So I think it's important to have a dialogue about this. If you'll recall earlier in my comments today, I referenced Section 28-1202, which essentially says, as except provided otherwise in this section, any person who carries a weapon or weapons concealed in or about his person, such as a handgun, a knife, brass knuckles, or iron knuckles, or any other deadly weapon, commits the offense of carrying a concealed weapon. Section B says it is an affirmative defense that the defendant was engaged in any lawful business, calling, or employment at the time he or she was carrying. You can see what that is. And as you know, an affirmative defense, which found, if credible, negates the criminal liability that was outlined in the first section. How do you read that differently than me?
Well, the way that I read that is that if you're in a circumstance, so say you're home or something like that, and you have a concealed firearm and you're lawfully carrying out whatever duties or things like that, you have an affirmative defense before the court if likely deadly force is brought up against you and you defend yourself.
But, okay, so you don't disagree with me that it negates the criminal liability?
Only if the affirmative defense is found to be,
which is fairly
reasonable.
broad in section 281202. So essentially what we're saying with the way the law is right now is that if a court agrees with you, the county attorney can still prosecute you, they can still arrest you, they can still jail you, but if the court finds that you had an affirmative defense, then it negates the criminal liability. My position is you can already carry concealed under that subsection. Why put the citizen, the law-abiding citizen, through that?
well, the reason why is outlined in the opposition by many of the police officers. They find that having a concealed carry license and having the training not only protects the public safety, but also their safety. And I would say, and what I need to do with this is I need to read some of the case law surrounding this, because I think it was enacted originally in 1977, because the court may have held very narrowly the circumstances in which this affirmative defense would be available.
Well, I appreciate what Senator Moorfield is saying, and I also appreciate that we're having a debate about what the statutory language says and what the law already is. Thank you, Senator Moorfield. When I was here back in 2006, I'm going to read the words spoken by a state senator. Quote, "Concealed weapons are just that, hard to conceal. They are uncomfortable and won't be allowed in many places. A vast majority of these weapons will end up in vehicles once the novelty of carrying them has worn off. This leads me to my point. The most common crimes in Lincoln, or the most common crime in Lincoln, is larceny, auto larceny. What will happen to these handguns once they are carelessly left in vehicles, where every rock-chucking, screwdriver-prying thief has access to them?" This is the kind of record that was made in 2006. And I don't want to depreciate the concerns of a senator then or a senator today, but this is Groundhog Day to an extent. And I am very comfortable with the way it's unfolded. If Senator Moorfield is correct, in 1977, Section 281202 provides this affirmative defense. 2006, we allow for the permitting of concealed carry, and we change 281202 to say it shall be an affirmative defense to it is a affirmative defense.
1 minute.
And then here we are 16 years later after our pilot program started in 2006, and we are asking that we make it simple for the citizen, the lawful, law-abiding citizen, the person who wants to carry concealed, that wants to exercise their Second Amendment right, where we are simply recognizing what the law has been. We are codifying that you don't need the permit, and we are talking about people that lawfully carry them. I do not think we're taking a big step here. I do not think this is going to incite violence. I think that we are allowing people to exercise their Second Amendment right. And I am going to vote for LB 773, 1757. I do not support AM 1794. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood and Senator Moorfield. Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. Addressing a couple things. One is I do agree with just what Senator Flood had just kind of said, in the sense that I do think we're having a pretty substantive, on-topic debate about the bounds of the bill, the bounds of current law, and where we're going. And I wouldn't want to necessarily, there's been some questions about some sincerity or some other things so far. And I want to point out from my perspective that, you know, in terms of sincerity to negotiate, you know, I have some things around the edges that I'm willing to do, much like Senator Moorfield, but a straight out complete repeal, it's hard for me to negotiate if that's the starting line, because that's so far from where I view we are now. Training, cost, fees, exceptions, things like that, sure. But if the notion is just a straight kind of repeal of the entire concealed carry permit, background check, licensing, all of those things, that's a tough spot to negotiate from, because that's, you know, a big step. And if that's a non-negotiable line, which I think it is, I don't really know where the room to negotiate is, unless people are willing to keep the permit there and work on training, and work on fees, and work on other barriers or burdens. I'd also like to point out, the Lincoln Police Department has been brought up a couple times, including our police chief's testimony in the committee, and I'm kind of not 100% sure what the goal is always in reading that testimony other than to build the record. Because it seems to me that there's been some indications that our police chief's position at the hearing made the police department in Lincoln not worth negotiating with and not worth even talking to. And for me, that does kind of bring up a concern well, if my city isn't even having a space at the negotiating table, as a Lincoln senator, what room do I have at the negotiating table? That's something I'm going to be monitoring and moving forward going into debate. Just because it's the most recent thing on my mind, I will say I do think this affirmative defense distinction that Senator Flood has brought up is interesting and worth looking at. I'll note the difference between something being legal and something being allowed in affirmative defense is that affirmative defense is something raised at trial. So this is still an arrestable offense because the police don't have to believe your affirmative defense, as opposed to if something was just flat out legal, they wouldn't have grounds to arrest you. And that is a difference of what stage of the process it gets invoked. And so this is being raised from something that occasionally in a dire circumstance, a person can raise a defense to avoid criminal liability, as opposed to being legal all of the time at day one. And I think that's a distinction worth making. We could decide where that we want that line to fall, or I'd be interested to hear more about the legislative history of how we put it in. Senator Moorfield has referenced, I'd be interested to hear some of the Supreme Court case law, if any, on how broadly or narrowly this term is defined. Because really kind of diving into it for the first time this morning. These are all the pieces that we are kind of wading through and stacking together on a bill like this. And so that's where I'm coming from. Oh man, I had another point that I waited a whole hour and I can't think of my third point. With that, Senator John Kavanaugh, would you like any time? He shrugs. I'll yield the balance of my time to Senator John Kavanaugh.
Senator John Kavanaugh yielded 120.
120. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hansen. I actually have been sitting over here trying to read some of the history about the affirmative defense too, as though I've been committed myself to continuing to talk about my amendment. And I was also, before Senator Flood and Senator Moorfield's good conversation, got distracted from reading about the Parole and Pardons Board in our state constitution.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so as to my amendment, I've had a few questions, and people, my amendment I'm serious about, and I think that it is a good amendment. It makes the bill better. But some people have asked me, actually, why do I not go further in this amendment? And I will talk about it again later. But this is as far as the legislature is empowered to go. To grant further relief to anyone who has previously been convicted of a crime, we would need to amend the Constitution to give the legislature more power. The Pardons Board is the only one that has that authority. That is in the Constitution of the state of Nebraska, and that the Pardons Board, if I recall, includes the governor, I think the attorney general, and so we don't have the authority to go back and completely clear someone's record, but we have the authority to create this sort of civil remedy under the set-aside statutes. And so that's why my amendment, my original bill, doesn't go farther to completely clear people's records.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Matt Hansen. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Did Senator John Kavanaugh need to finish his thought? He's good. Okay. So I previously said that I will vote for Senator John Kavanaugh's amendment, but if it was a standalone bill, I wouldn't be voting for his bill. But I do think if AM 1757 is going to pass, then we should be lifting those penalties. I did want to comment on something that Senator Kavanaugh said when he called me the other Senator Kavanaugh. When he called me the other Senator Kavanaugh, I just wanted to correct for the record that I am the first Senator Kavanaugh, not the other. Thank you very much. So back to the bill. I understand comments about that people wanting to work on this or not work on this or filibuster. So I just want to be clear. I oppose LB 773. I don't want to work on it. I think that our gun laws right now are satisfactory. This seeks to solve a problem that I don't believe exists. And so I am filibustering it, and I'm not trying to be sneaky about that at all. I can talk about the merits of the bill itself, or I can just read the language, or I can share with you my musings about which Kavanaugh came first. But I am filibustering this bill. I don't agree with this bill. And I just didn't want people to be confused as though I were trying to hide that what I was doing. I oppose LB 773. And when people contact my office lets them know that I oppose LB 773. I think that our current gun laws are sufficient and are doing a good job. I also think that it is important to take into consideration when law enforcement comes and testifies about their personal safety on the job. I think it is really, really important to listen to them and make sure that they are heard. Law enforcement and I are not always on the same side of things, but I very, very much appreciate their work, their commitment, their family's commitment. And if there is something that I can do to keep them safer in their jobs, then I'm going to do that. And if there's something that I might do that will make them less safe, and they have told me very strongly that it will make them less safe, then I'm not going to do that. And they don't think that LB 773 is a good public safety bill, and neither do I. I don't think that the carve-outs for Omaha are good public policy because they basically do more to institutionalize systemic racism. The only reason I like AM 1794 is because if we're going to do this, then we should stop penalizing Black people. But this is definitely a filibuster. I think we're about to break for lunch, so I probably don't need to take us right up to the minute. So, Mr. President, how much time do I have left?
1:20.
Okay, I will yield it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. New resolutions, LR 328 by Senator Aguilar is a proposed interim study that will be referred to the executive board. LR 329 by Senator Colderman congratulates Concordia University men's basketball team that will be laid over. Amendments to be printed, 933 by Senator Albright. 852, Senator Moorfeld. 888 by Senator Bostman. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh to 59. 75, 705, 1148, 971, 691, and 1178. Senator Williams to 1069. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, 795, 1147, 697, and 824, as well as 807, 779, 808, 1092, 1204, and 1184, 1165. Name add Senator Wayne to LB 704, 705, 1037. And finally, priority motion, Senator Clements has moved to recess until 1:30 p.m.
Members, we will be holding the queue and begin debate again this afternoon at 1:30 on LB 775. You've heard the motion to recess. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. We are in recess.